Put her on the screen, yes. On the big screen. Yeah, you want to She's in the presence. Oh, she's in the chair. Is she in the chair? Yes. Hey.
Oh, is this Galen Bren?
Hey, hello.
Hi, Galen. Yes, you're sitting here in a virtual chair in front of, well, something more than 100 people. We can all see you now.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Galen.
And Bruce is taking pictures of your virtual identity. Typically Bruce.
Hello. Yes, well, actually, I can see you because I'm watching you simultaneously.
Okay, so.
Well, there's science fiction in action.
Okay, so. Physical body. Usually I'm in Avatar. So it's great to be here in Holland. And just wonderful. I haven't been back here in 9 years. And it's just a fantastic community. A little bit of an explanation. This jacket here that you see is something that I made.
Like this one then.
Actually,
yeah, that's better.
Yeah, there we go. This is something that I made last year, and it's inspired by Snow Crash. And have you read Snow Crash out there? Well, there's a young girl in Snow Crash. It's on a hoverboard, and she goes into the federal office building and knocks out all the agents with all the gear and wares that she's wearing on her body. And I always thought, well, what would YT, what was this character wear? She'd wear something cool. Not like what the MIT Media Lab guys would have. They look like cyborgs. So I decided to, because I'm into avatars, I realized that mobile computing was coming and that you were going to become an avatar wherever you were walking in the street. So I put that passion together, learned how to sew, and made this. So this is sort of a combination of the Renaissance, something you might see in the Rijksmuseum, but the 21st century. So you've got your iPod, you can run it right through here, all your cell phones, and you've got your little solar collectors, except these aren't real solar collectors. So anyway, so that gives you an explanation of why I'm wearing this. It also looks a little bit Trek. So let me get started here. This is going to be a very personal journey to explain to you how I got into the virtual worlds game and where I'm trying to take the medium. So I'm going to read this off. It's a very sort of personal slideshow that I think you'll like. It's 1969, and the young Bruce Damer was riding his brand new bike, a Canadian-made bike, around the neighborhood in British Columbia in Canada. And I was riding it through the slush. We had real winters. To a friend's house who had a color TV. And that was to see the launch of a Saturn V rocket on a test of the Apollo hardware for the full trip to the moon. One of the astronauts was a red-haired guy. I remember seeing, they showed the bio of, this is Walter Cronkite and everything. A red-haired guy, and he was named Rusty. And later on, when there were actually men on the moon, I went outside in the dark as a kid trying to see if I could see any sign of the Apollo LEM there on the surface. Of course, you couldn't. Michael Collins, who was in orbit, couldn't see any sign. So, but I had to get back into the house, get back home to watch the latest episode of Star Trek. So you can imagine, 1969, this is all going on in the young kid's mind. Apollo project and Star Trek was on TV. And let's go to a really interesting piece I think you'll like here, if it works.
The sexy technological innovation of the USS Enterprise had seduced the young Bruce Damer and a generation of computer nerds.
When I was a kid, my brother and I used to lie in our bed and watch Star Trek. One of the things we always noticed, and that I always noticed, was Spock, whenever there was something to really be understood, he would go on the bridge over to a console that had like a hooded screen and look in, and blue light would shine on his face.
Oxygen, nitrogen atmosphere suitable for human life support.
I always wondered, what is this guy seeing on the screen?
While Spock was staring into his mysterious database portal, the rest of the crew could be seen using user-friendly computers in every aspect of their lives. A revolutionary idea that would change everything.
So all the geeks in the 60s who were growing up saw that and said, we got to make that real in the 70s. And they did.
But it wouldn't happen overnight. Star Trek may have shown early computer pioneers what the future might be, but it didn't tell them how to get there. This would take some experimentation. The first attempt came in 1974 with a whopping great blue box that is widely seen as the first ever personal computer. But it's not quite the PC we take for granted today. It came as a highly intricate build-it-yourself kit, and once you had finished soldering its circuit boards together, users would find that it didn't actually really do anything because software hadn't been invented yet. Yes, it wasn't perfect, but for thousands of would-be tech types, it was a start. And thanks to its Trek fan inventor, Ed Roberts, it had a somewhat familiar-sounding name.
So here we have the Sputnik for the nerd generation. This is the Altair 8800, named after a solar system in Star Trek.
Directly for Altair 6. Altair 6. I think I'm going to get spacesick.
This became the focus of many homebrew and personal computer clubs. Kids trying to figure out how to make this thing useful. And a couple of those kids were Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, and their version of the Altair Useful was the Apple computer. And Bill Gates and his guys wrote BASIC, the language for this thing, and they created a company called Microsoft. So the modern world came out of this unassuming blue box.
So that's in a program with William Shatner, who was the original Captain Kirk, and it was done with the History Channel last year. And you may have seen it here in Holland. It's all over all the time. So this, as a 7-year-old kid, this put into my little brain at that time. I kept focusing on this. What did Spock see in this console, right? Everything was available to him. He could determine if there was a city or where they should land, the contents of the atmosphere, everything. What did he see? What was the interface? How could he interpret all that? So that's the theme of this talk. So did Spock see a big stream of data, like you see here from the Matrix, that told him there was oxygen, nitrogen suitable for human life? Did he see, was he a super intellect, and could he render the whole reality in his brain just from numbers? Or did the computer tools render it for him? Did they do some of the work for him? Did he see graphics? What did the guy see? Did he see virtual worlds? So, armed with that question, in the mid-70s, I took up the quest of drawing, and mostly with colored pencils that you see here. And I wanted to create a virtual world. What is this guy seeing? And it just sort of was rattling around in my brain, so it had to come out. So here, some of the weird machines I drew when I was a teenager, spacecraft and whatnot. No computers graphics here. And some of the weird worlds of the imagination. This is probably from when I was in high school. And then, one magic day in 1981, I discovered, actually a little bit earlier, 79, but in 81 I discovered computers. And computers were the renderer. The computer could put stuff out on the screen that could be in your mind. And to me it was magic. And I thought, this is it. Software is the greatest place to create worlds. It has to be. So I learned how to program. These are three of the computers I programmed on. And a couple of years after that, I saw a computer with a bitmap display that you could use. You could render every pixel. And this is really early on. And it immediately popped into my head that if you could model robots in this environment with physics and a landscape, you could model them on the moon and you could show how they could reproduce. Why would you want them to reproduce? So you don't have to send lots of them up there. You can send up one and they make copies, and that somehow reproducing robots and adapting robots would allow people to live permanently in space. So in college, I got myself a computer on the left called a VAX 750 and a Tektronix terminal up there, and I started doing artificial life programming. This was at University of Southern California. So the programs had artificial animals eating artificial plants, and it was a lot of fun. I didn't get any credit for it. So I was driving around North America in the early 90s looking for people who did this kind of thing, and I visited the Santa Fe Institute, which you see up there on the left. I visited a man named Chris Langton, and I saw on the screen of his lab this evolving virtual creature thing you see on the right. And I put it all together and I said, of course, there's going to be multi-user worlds. Any of us who were in MUDs knew that. And there's going to be creatures in there. And I explained it all to Chris, who probably didn't really understand it, but he did eventually. So I moved to Silicon Valley and created 2 organizations to do all this work. The Contact Consortium, a nonprofit, and Digital Space. And you'll see what they did later. Then, just in time, this was all done just in time for the explosion of virtual worlds that happened on the internet. 1995, somebody put a 3D engine together on the net, on the internet itself, and you could wander around a space station, a science fiction theme, called Worlds Chat. What happened after that was an explosion. The Contact Consortium went on to help pioneer avatars and events in virtual worlds. As virtual worlds started out, they were very primitive and simple. Avatars didn't have any gestures. There were just a few objects. But from day one, we started to push the limits of this medium. And you can see some of the events. The one in the upper right is Sherwood Forest Town. That was at Ars Electronica. And there's other events I'll show you. But these are big online gatherings we did every year called the Avatars Cyber Conference. And it turns out that when we did the annual Avatar Cyber Conference, we have thousands of people coming into these worlds, we decided to choose a lot of science fiction themes. Because virtual worlds seem spacey, they seem science fiction-y. So this is, for example, Avatars 2000. And it was a space station. And in fact, Alex, who's sitting in the row here, was one of the guys that programmed the bots to help run this event. Then you can see the rings of the space station, and you could travel through them in your avatar and do all kinds of things. It was a tremendous event. Avatars 2001, we stole Stanley Kubrick's film. And we recreated the film so you could walk through getting to Jupiter, the stations of the cross. And then we also did some science fact-inspired worlds. We did one with Kim Stanley Robinson, a Marscape world, and we did a drive on Mars with NASA to drive real models of the Mars exploration rovers. Then, amazingly enough, about 30 years to the day, I went to a conference in Southern California and I met this man, Rusty Schweikart, who was on Apollo 9 that I saw as a kid, and his hair's not red anymore. In fact, he lived in Den Haag for about a couple of years. His wife wanted to live in Holland, so he really loves Holland. So anyway, so what we decided to do is do a reenactment in a virtual world of a walk on the moon. And do it down to the minute that it actually happened on the 30th birthday. So this is the event we held. And Rusty walked people through, told the whole story of riding on the Saturn V, what it was like. And people got to go up into this virtual LEM and drive their avatars down the ladder and walk on the moon themselves. It was a phenomenal experience that led to actually a book chapter was written for Brenda Laurel's last book on design research. So, cyberspace finally met outer space in the embodiment of Mr. Schweikart. So I thought, well, hey, maybe it's time to take these worlds to NASA. And NASA said yes. And they hired Bruce, myself, Digital Space, to help them visualize the future of space for exploration for the last 7 years. So we've done a zillion projects, and some of them are, you can see them up here, astronaut training for the space station. This is all real-time graphics with joysticks, vehicles wandering around on surfaces of planets. And we'll show you a few of these. So how does this work? Well, this is actual screenshots, actual photographs of a mission design team at Jet Propulsion Lab designing a rover mission for the moon to go and explore for ice in the South Pole. So here's a guy that does the CAD after a week of doing the actual vehicle, its weight, the propulsion, everything. And we look at potential terrains that we're going to drive in. This is Dawes Crater. And how do you drive down a very steep crater wall? And NASA gives us, the Digital Space team, their very bare bones CAD model. And then we turn them into a drivable simulation that the scientists and designers can actually drive online on their laptops and really iterate it and think it through. It's a brand new kind of a tool. But this isn't the end of the story. Hey, the Starship Enterprise's mission was not only to explore strange new worlds, but to also seek out new life and new civilizations, i.e. Rob's call that, are we alone? Which we may be anyway, but at least in science fiction, they're always trying to find them, mostly guys in rubber suits. So I just remembered that 25 years ago, I had this vision of self-reproducing robots on the moon. And it came to me that humans could not live in space without life being there first. This is kind of a catch-22, and I'll explain why. So for all the dreams of science fiction to come true, we had to create new life forms or new forms of life to go out into space with us. Why is this? Just sort of a little aside, on the space station, you hear about it, it houses up to about 5 or 6 people. It needs constant maintenance. It's protected from solar radiation storms by being in the magnetosphere. If you took booster rockets on the International Space Station and put on a trajectory toward Mars, I guarantee you those people would be dead within 60 days. There would be a failure on the system, they couldn't get a new part, something would go out, there's no lifeboat. The space station and all spacecraft represent probably the pinnacle of achievement of 19th century steam engine technology. Pressure vessels, hard parts, really kind of not appropriate for that environment where single points of failure are totally fatal. And so we're actually going to space with Isambard Kingdom Brunel as our designer right now. It's never going to work. So for ships to actually last, they actually have to be like living things. They have to be self-aware, self-repairing, even the hard components. Your bones can repair themselves. There's no part of you that's not alive. And we have to design synergistic life forms, aliens if you will, to help us survive in space. They have to help make our air, our water, and our food out of the stuff that formed the solar system. Scientists believe now that the oceans were created after the cooling of the Earth's crust, after the Earth-Moon collision created the Moon. Cool Earth crust, and then you had a whole bunch of icy balls coming in, comets if you will, that gave us our oceans and gave all the organic molecules. So the stuff that we're made of is stuff that rained down, and is constantly raining down every year. There's more of this stuff comes down. And therefore, the future of human beings in space is to go and find that stuff. And it's trillions of objects, an uncountable number of objects floating around in the solar system that vastly out, in significance, vastly outperform the planets themselves. They're the dark matter of the solar system. So the aliens that we go out to space with probably won't look like this, but more like this, like the Borg. This is a ship that is definitely a biologically inspired thing, a native of space. Whether it's realistic or not is another question. So, in order to go with this quest, I founded another organization called Biota. You can check it out at biota.org. And for our first event, I decided to take 60 scientists up to the Burgess Shale. And this is a fossil quarry about 3,000 meters up in the Canadian Rockies, very near where I was raised. And where you can find, if you see on the right-hand side there, those are sort of Cambrian-era critters. The first time that nature had large bodies and fins and stomachs and things to work with. And you had all this diversity, so-called Cambrian explosion. And there's actually the gentleman on the bottom on the left is Tom Ray, who created the Tierra simulation, which showed sort of artificial evolution in strings and memory copying. And the guy on the right is a paleontologist. And I wanted to see how these two guys could actually communicate. And there's a huge gulf between paleontology and those people who create artificial life in software. And we discovered that gulf to our pleasure at the conference. That was the point of the conference. The Digital Burgess. Went on to have 4 more conferences after this. So Project Biota, it's a community. We've had a lot of interesting people involved. Richard Dawkins, Douglas Adams have been involved, Tom Ray, Carl Sims, quite a number. But it's a place for the next, what I consider, it's a very ambitious goal for the next phase of life in the universe. I.e., if Rob says we're alone, then we better do something about it. And we can't necessarily, we have to take Terran biology with us and take it out there and allow it to live natively in that environment. So we need to rapidly accelerate evolution, and we can use one tool, it's called cyberspace, to do that. And I'll show you. So that we can enable this breakout. So where will we evolve these virtual creatures? Okay, so come back to the question before we go on to that. What did Spock actually see? Did Spock already see this? Did he already see us creating life forms like the Borg, maybe not as destructive as the Borg, but going out as a partnership, as a synergistic partnership, not screwing up our planet because, of course, the Federation somehow didn't have the nuclear war and they didn't wreck the atmosphere. They survived, they went out. And so did Spock actually see that we were going to do this? What did he actually see? A blue light bulb. If you talk to people who worked on the show, there was a blue light bulb. Not this blue light bulb, but a no longer existing blue light bulb. So, the life lesson is, it's actually up to us to invent the rest. That's the lesson of science fiction. Live long and prosper. I'm just going to run a little movie, a little trailer. This is something that many of you may have seen. I alluded to it earlier. I asked the question, where are we going to evolve life forms? Well, this is a fascinating little piece of fossil history. These are creatures, they're artificial creatures, evolved in the connection machine, a machine with thousands of processors, in software written by Carl Sims about 15 years ago. And all of these swimming actions, and you'll see running and jumping later, evolved, i.e. millions of iterations and generations went by as these creatures competed for food and competing with the environment. And all these sort of morphological designs emerged. And they're very fairly simple genomes in there and very simple mechanisms, but the same kind of crawling snake behaviors. Here's a wobbler. Sort of a flopper. And you'll see some that are quite sophisticated. There's a rower. The best of all, okay, this is sort of this double rowing thing. I don't know what this is. Sort of a nose walker. Sort of a going nowhere. And sort of a thrower. And this next one I think is the sidewinder. And this is interesting. It goes and then it decides to go another way somehow. It's going to stop and up. It's going and going back. And I think the best of all, no, this one's good. This one's one that sort of falls and walks. Kind of like somebody on Queen's Day. This is the gorilla. The gorilla was the all-time winner for speed. Now these jumpers, some of them are able to create divide by zeros and reproduce cheat. Now this is interesting. This is a following, sort of a four-arm paddle thing that follows the cursor. None of this was programmed. This is all evolved. And then you're going to see why nature did not invent three-armed fish. And now we're going to see a beautiful thing that any Dutchman would like, because it's got a forward and back prop. It's like a real barge here. Watch it go. Watch how it can go up and get close to the cursor and back up. Just like a good ship canal or canal ship would do. See that? So just to conclude, if we're alone, even if we're not alone, wouldn't it be a cool thing if we could actually use cyberspace? And we're going to have 80 core CPUs in 5 years. Intel tells us 80 cores. So you're going to have a connection machine inside your desktop PC for $100. And you have the graphic processor units, you have physics simulations, and you have the whole internet. You have SETI at home and things like that. Wouldn't it be cool if, as an experiment, just for fun, human beings decided we're going to try to get life to actually take foot in this medium? Now, of course, the biologists might say that's not life. I went to see Richard Dawkins, had tea with him a few years ago, proposed this project, and he said, of course I'll get on board with this. It'll push the button of the creationists, which is one for him. And the second thing is it'll force biologists to ask, what is a living system at the lowest level? And he said he proposed that every year we have an annual look-see in this digital evolving soup, and each one of the people on the committee will be like a figure skating competition. They'll hold up a sign saying, oh, that's an 8.5 in the genomic drift category, or that's a 0 in the, so they'd be able to rate the creatures and things that they saw. And Dawkins said, I would love 1 year to be able to give a Latin taxonomic name to a system in there, or a creature, and study it as a biologist would study it. Now, the ethical issue of doing this kind of thing is huge, because are those things on the endangered species list? What if you pull the plug on the servers? Are you a criminal? What happens in the future if these are not Ray Kurzweil's AIs and singularities and all that rubbish? These are low-level simulated, slime molds, things like this. Just very basic, but it's maybe authentic. Why would life want to get into a medium like that? Say, for instance, if you stood back and said, Gaia's blowing all her wad on humanity, because the Earth has got about 200-300 million years where the sun's getting hotter and hotter. Forget global warming now. In 300-400 million years, it'll be too hot to have plants on land. It'll be starting to get, as M-class star gradually gets hotter. So we're actually past middle age. And so you're not going to have plants on land, you're going to have big animals or anything. A couple billion years from now, the oceans will start boiling off. So we're done. We're toast. And there'll be bacteria here all the way up to the point where the sun gobbles us up when it's a red giant. So Gaia is saying, wait a minute, okay, the dinosaurs things didn't work, so I ordered an airstrike, got rid of them. And before that, there were all these big, huge, crunchy creatures in the ocean that were never doing a damn thing, so I ordered them wiped out. So I started with these bipeds. Bipeds that can look up. I learned my lesson. They got to be able to look. They got to not be underwater, and they got to be able to look up. They'll figure something out. And Gaia's going, oh boy, they're burning up all the fossil fuels I stored. They're going to really wreck this thing. They've got this thing called religion. They might kill themselves over that because they can simulate anything in their heads. But maybe just some nerds, will use their digits and create a realm that I can get into, where I can get into evolving things that aren't made out of chemical atoms and bits. They're made out of bits. And they're weightless. Why is that important? Because you can evolve faster. And because you can transmit. You can get life off the planet very easily. When we send new code to the Mars exploration rovers, new operating system code, we're exporting a piece of our technology at light speed with no weight to a receiver out there, and it's changing the way that the rover works. So it's a little piece of this puzzle. So can you imagine in a future where a visionary crackpot human project manages to use the internet for 25 years and evolve based on simulating asteroid surfaces and comet surfaces, evolves a viable form of robotic bio-life that can actually live there. And they actually managed to get the budget from somebody, probably the Europeans, because they don't pay attention to the crackpot project as much as the US does. So the Europeans fund this seed project, so up it goes. The modules go out there and they put the starter stuff, the little flakes, and the little flakes attach themselves to various objects surrounding the sun at a certain point where it's warm enough. And those objects start collecting energy, and they're pretty dumb, but underneath is the evolvers. So the software gets loaded into them, they start growing, they start eating the surface, and then the whole thing's covered with lichen. It's almost like lichen around all these millions and millions of objects. And then one day we say, hey, that worked, because we hear all this communication traffic. We don't understand it, but the things are talking to each other. And then we could say, now we have the contact problem. We got to talk to them and say, hey, we want to live out there too. Can you make us some breathable air out of that stuff, please? When we get there, can you not attack us? Because we made you, you see, you're the biology. And so that would be the vision. So we would bootstrap in the old homebrew way, bootstrap our way into space, way easier than doing these steamships. And those things would build our ships for us. We would be in a synergistic relationship. Earth's biology has gone out and lives there natively, and that's probably the only way that we can get out.
Bruce, well, first of all, thank you, of course, but we've got Galen Brand here, virtually present. Well, surely Bruce isn't finished yet. But your poor wife has been sitting here. There's not much interaction going on.
Oh, hey.
There she is.
Turn the video.
Can you see Bruce too?
Hey.
So that was her. In the beginning of this night, you could see her perform in the cyber suit All there. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. So she's present too. Okay. Anybody has a question for Bruce David?
Can you hear me?
Yes, very loud.
Oh my goodness. Hello. And yes, I can see Bruce. Thank you.
So you've been with us all the time. You could hear him and could see him
Yes.
too?
Yeah, I had it on the screen.
Okay, great. How does that feel? How is it different from the physical experience? Except for the time lag.
How's it different, my love?
That's quite clear.